Welcome to another episode of Coaching Through Uncertainty. I'm Brianna Hodges, National Faculty for Future Ready Schools, and with me is one of my favorite people in the world, always brings a smile to my face and leaves me completely inspired with all of his wisdom and educational practices, but mostly for his energy and his just heart. So without further ado, I've got Victor Tam. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, who you serve, and just kind of give everybody else out there a little peek into the heart of Victor?
Of course. I'm going to start by saying that I feel the same about you, Brianna. You know, you bring so much to the conversations and to life, and I've learned so much from you. For me, I'm a school principal here in San Francisco Unified School District. We're part of the public school system. I'm at a school called the Edwin and Anita Newcomer School. And until I think 2 years ago, we were called the Chinese Education Center. Last year, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. Our school is focused on newcomer students from China. So 51 years ago, there was a huge influx of Chinese students into the United States and into San Francisco, and most of them were from Hong Kong and China at that time. So the public school system back 51 years ago didn't really know how to work with these students. So they tried to start a couple of classrooms with just newcomer students. And then from there, 51 years later, we have a school that's dedicated to working with newcomer students just from China. And in San Francisco, we're really lucky because we have two schools like this. We have the Chinese Education Center, or the Edwin and Anita Lee Newcomer School, and we have the Mission Education Center, which serves the students who have a Spanish background, who are newcomers. And the reason why I am so privileged and honored to serve there as the principal is because I came as an immigrant myself, and I'm old, and I came through at a time where I lived in a very black and white environment. And the joke that I always have is that Chinatown was wherever my family was, because that's how few Chinese that I saw in the streets. And I didn't have any of this kind of support growing up. So I grew up in a very conflicted way, where there was half of me that wanted just to be American, white American, and there was half of me that hated being who I was, that was Chinese. And it took me a long time to make sense of all that. And now I'm in a position where I get to serve families with, they're feeling the similar struggle. And I'm positioned to come full circle back to support students where I needed it a long time ago.
I love that. There's so many things in this that I just want to unpack with you a little bit, because I think, growing up in a small town in Texas, there's so many things that you said that really, really resonate with me. Number one, having the, not having a lot of cultural influence, diverse cultural influence that comes in, and then how that feels for the few that are in those situations, right? But alongside that, one of the things that stood out with me is we talk about English language learners, and we recognize that we have many immigrants, that we have lots of students that are coming to us at different ages, right, with different backgrounds and all of these things. But oftentimes, there's one person who is, quote unquote, the English language learner teacher, or, and it takes me to an experience that I had where, what our teachers were very accustomed to working with students of Hispanic heritage and with Spanish as their background. But we had two students that had come to us and they were brother and sister, and no, excuse me, they were brothers, young kids that were kindergarten and I believe second grade, and spoke Mandarin Chinese, and no one in our school district had any, I mean, there was no support at all for it. And, I was reached out to that said, how can you help us? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I don't speak Mandarin. I don't, there's not an app that can teach you. I mean, there's all of these things. And that just really sits with me of, all of these conversations then last year, when my daughter was going into second grade, I took her to class on the first day of school, walked her in, and there was this little girl, and she was just bawling, crying, standing in the middle of the hallways. And I stopped and I reached out, and on her backpack, she had a note that was taped onto her backpack that said, what her name was and what her, and that had a phone number. I think that was all that was on there. And I remember, like, I reached down and I asked her, and she didn't speak very much English, very, very, very little English, but she was just bawling, crying. And I reached out and I held her hand and I said, you just come with me and we'll help you. And so I just carried her around with me, and I told my daughter, I walked with my daughter, we both walked with her, and said, I told my daughter, I've got to go help her find somebody, because, now you're in your right place, but I need to go help her get to her right place. And my heart just completely went out to be in that situation where you are completely new. And so I think this is fantastic that you are supporting that learning and that community in that way, because there is so much of this. School becomes the hub in a lot of ways for our newly arrived communities. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think, you spoke about a few things. One is that feeling of isolation as a minority. Like I am a person of color, but growing up, I was literally a minority. I was the only Asian American in every one of my schools until senior year of high school. And in senior year of high school, there was an influx of Hmong refugees that came into our school. And it was interesting because at that time, I couldn't even identify as an Asian American with another Asian American. I was so conflicted. So there's that feeling of isolation.
And how old were you? I'm sorry, Victor, to interrupt. How old were you when you immigrated to the United States?
So I came over when I was 3 months old, but I also grew up within a family that we were so isolated. Like my parents their primary language is still Cantonese. And we didn't interact outside of our space, our apartment very much at all. I had very little contact with other people until I went to school. And I always remember since Head Start, just being pulled out by that one teacher, like what you're talking about, and being pulled out from the group and being different and just looking. And I have a lot of visual memories, but not a lot of audio memories, interestingly enough. And just this continuous feeling of space, more distance and isolation. Like there's this, at the core of who I am, there's a part of me that feels very, very disconnected at times. And I think it stems from that isolation as a young child. The other thing I wanted to touch upon is when you met that little girl who did not speak any English, but you connected with her, there are a lot of times we as educators, we have students that come to us where we may not know exactly what to do to work with this one student. The tools that we've learned along the way in our tool belts, they may not work with this one student. But I think that in my experience, as this is my 30th year as an educator, one of the things that I know and believe is that when you speak from the heart, people can hear from the heart. It transcends language. And your experience with that little girl is testament to that. That here's this little girl, she didn't know what was going on. She was very isolated. You could tell that she felt very scared. And for you to come down to that little girl and connect with her from your heart, even though you had no language connection, no, like you didn't know her, she didn't know you, but she trusted you because she knew that you were coming from that place of your heart. And I think that it's so important now more than ever when we are, literally distanced from each and every one of our students, our families, our colleagues, that we need to tap into the power of the heart. And there are people who are very natural at tapping into that power. Because it exudes from them. They're the people like you, Brianna, who you just feel it and you just want to I just want to follow this person. I don't care where they're going. I just want to follow them, And then we have colleagues who have trouble with that for a lot of reasons along the way in life. People lose that power or get disconnected from it. And I think that I suspect that a lot of the challenges with distance learning can come down to this part. We know how important social emotional learning is and that social emotional connection. And districts are telling schools and teachers, focus on social emotional, the social emotional portion, those first week or first few weeks. But if you're not doing it every day, if it's not intertwined in who you are, in every lesson that you are sharing, you're going to lose kids. You're going to lose a lot of your kids. You're going to lose it in this distance. And it may not appear in these first few days or weeks or maybe even months, but looking ahead in this year, we don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know how long we're going to be in distance learning. And along this way, this may be a long year for all of us, or it could be a year where we find a way to connect through this machine.
Yes.
And meet heart to heart.
Oh, I love that. I think that part of it, and again, there's so much in there that I want to kind of talk through because I love that you really focus on SEL, and I would imagine that is a huge component of your work in at the Newcomer School, because it's not what content you're teaching, right? It's who you're teaching. It's that heart that comes into it, and it's the connection. It's not the content, it's the connection. And it's not speaking it louder. It's not there's not a magic trick to teaching immigrant students. It's more of how can we connect and how can we really explain that information, just like with any of our students, regardless of where they are from. Every student brings circumstances and situations and suitcases to every interaction, and so I love that you are for you, that was a big component of what was missing in your time growing up, was that SEL moment. And not moment's not the right word, because like you said, it's intertwined into every single thing that we do. As human beings, our brain truly wants to look at any kind of circumstance and figure out where we belong in that. And that doesn't mean that we're, overly emotional creatures that just want people to love us. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's that we want to know where our puzzle piece fits. And, we want to know that, that there's a reason for us and there's a purpose for us to pay attention and to feel safe, or all of those pieces. And when we don't see that we connect in there, when we're shown that we are different, right? Like I think, as a secondary teacher, I saw this all the time with my students who had different accommodations and modifications. And, I had several students that had modifications to have tests read aloud to them, or things like that. And hands down, especially the older that they get, right? They don't raise their hand. They don't want and their scores, even if they were removed from the class and sent, to have a small group test, their scores were tanking. And I would have the other teachers who were pulling them out tell me they're not using them. There are all these different things. And so finally I pulled this one set of kids aside, and I was like, tell me what's going on, because you guys do this when you're in here with me. And they were like, we don't like that. We don't like being pulled out. I mean, they're adolescents. They don't want everyone to know you're different, right? And so so that honestly was for me the start of utilizing technology in my classroom. And we were not a one-to-one school. This was early on when none of this happened, but I managed to get a grant to have a classroom set. I got to have 15. It wasn't even a classroom set because I had 30 plus. I had 15 iPads, and I started to I read aloud the test, right? And I just read it aloud, made it a little audio file, and slapped it on the iPad, and they, played it. And I gave them a little pep talk at the very beginning of saying, this is, how to do this. I believe in you. Just, this is your chance. Now you get to fast forward me, you get to rewind me, you get to do whatever you want to do, but just, use what you need to use. And hands down, every one of them, all of a sudden, their scores just went through the roof, because they were no longer bringing attention to themselves for being different. And they saw that, and other people saw that they had a place within the classroom, not removed from it, but really in there. And I think that power, like you told us, like that power of not being held differently is so important for our kids. And I can't stress that enough, of like that, what that looks like for them. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about with you was you talking about that isolation that was coming from, your family, as the, what did you say? Chinatown is wherever we lived, right? Like, because you didn't have a community, your family was your community. And we see this a lot with, with a lot of immigrants or newly immigrants, or where that native language is spoken at home, right? And so the only time that they're hearing English is when they come to school, and all of those different pieces. And so I'm curious about how, especially in your situation where you're the principal of a newcomer school, you've got a community there. There's a fairly established community, 50 years, obviously, at least, of a strong Chinese presence and Asian American presence that's in there. How is reaching out to your community different, or is it not, as a principal? How are you engaging with a very strong and proud community to help them feel as a welcome and part of a new community, I guess, as at your new school?
Those are great questions. I think um, oftentimes we look at San Francisco as having a very significant Asian American and Chinese American population. What we see with newcomers is that, and this is fascinating, it's not just with the Asian American community, it happens with the Spanish speaking community and other communities too, that when you have a group of Asian Americans, by that I mean people who are either born and raised here who are of Asian descent, or people who have been here for many years who came as immigrants, but then have been in the system here and are very familiar with the structures and the systems here. Oftentimes what we see is there's a disconnect between a newcomer and this Asian American community. And when I served as a principal in one of our more traditionally regular schools, it was fascinating to see that there's this whole Chinese American community, and then here comes one or two Chinese speaking newcomers, and the students didn't seem to accept them. Some even pushed them away, and they felt very isolated. So there was this one student at one of my former schools. She came in as a 5th grader, as a newcomer. And she and I connected because I was a fairly new principal at that school. And she found out very quickly that I spoke Cantonese. So during lunch, we would just talk and chat. About halfway through the year, she stopped talking. She shut down. And having SSTs and later on IEPs, we found out that she became a selective mute. And the suspicion was that it was because she just didn't connect. And I think as educators, one of the most important things that we have to do is teach kids how to be a community, how to be a good person and connect with people who are different from us. And I think that had educators across the United States done a better and more intentional job of this for years, we probably wouldn't have to address some of the racial injustices that we are facing right now. I do think that part of the breakdowns in our society are because of gaps within our educational system that we as educators have not done a good job in addressing intentionally and systemically across the board. For us in our community, interestingly enough, our school is located right in Chinatown, San Francisco's Chinatown. And our families often report that they face a lot of prejudice when they go to Chinatown. Chinatown is changing. Chinatown is changing in the sense that San Francisco Chinatown is deeply rooted in Cantonese, Southern Canton, and more of the immigrants coming, actually all of the immigrants coming are Mandarin because China switched over to Mandarin as an official language years and years ago. So every one of our students come in schooled in Mandarin. And they come into San Francisco, and sometimes even for them to go within the community to go buy groceries, they feel that sense of distance and isolation. And I feel very positioned, having lived through that, to talk to them about it. Because, yeah, a big part of that reason is because I lived through that. And I've come full circle, and I can connect with people within our San Francisco Chinatown community and with these immigrant families and talk to them about, some strategies that they can try and use. Like, you know how it is. We can't control other people and how they are, but we can control who we are and how we respond. And these days, more than ever, we have to be very careful in how we respond. So our school is an interesting place, and I love this. I feel so fortunate to be able to hold these kinds of conversations with our families. And then on another level, our district is very progressive and proactive in addressing equity and social justice. I'm really proud to be part of San Francisco Unified, especially in this way. Our superintendent, who shared his own personal story recently with our admin team, he was outstanding in sharing his experience as a Black American growing up and as an educator. And he's tasked us as principals to hold these conversations with our teams and our families. And I think that it's so important for us, for me, to hold these conversations with our families because they come from China, and so much of what they see about America is through social media and news, right? And social media and news magnify the worst parts of us. They come in thinking everyone in the United States owns guns, that Black people are bad, that there's crime everywhere, and you just have to be scared, And we have to have these conversations with them to help them understand that there's a lot of untruth in what they've seen and heard and learned their whole lives. It's fascinating too, because some of our own students, our newcomer students who have gone on through other schools and into middle school and high school, they'll come back and visit because we're like a home to them. And I tell them, we're a family. Just like a family, you can go far, you can even lose touch, but you can always come back. And it's when they come back, like sometimes I ask them, like, what are some of the challenges that you faced as a student? And I've asked them about prejudice, and they say, the people who are harshest to us as newcomers are often Chinese Americans. And I asked, okay, then who are the people who are the kindest to you? And so often they say it's the Black kids and the Latino kids who really reach out, and they make friends with us. And I think that's so powerful, kids. Yeah.
No. I love, because I think one of the things that we say so much, but we rarely do, and especially as educators, is that we say we want to celebrate the unique gifts that everyone has, but then because of our systems and because of our our grades and our assessments and all of that, what we really mean is that we want you to fit into these these very specific commonalities that we've kind of created. And I love that you're showing that these kids are celebrating the diversity of each other. They're recognizing, you know, by saying that the Black American kids, the Latinos are the ones who are, I would venture a guess that they're not reaching out to these newcomer students as, oh, you're the same as me. Instead, they recognize that they too have been isolated as different, and they're able to recognize that unique, and you know, the uniqueness, and celebrate that beautiful opportunity that's there to connect with kids. And I think that's what we want, right? We don't want to deny who you are. We want to embrace and celebrate who you are, and that is an element that we all need to do a better job of entirely.
Definitely. And I think my story also illustrates earlier within our educational system. Why is it that those Asian American kids show the most animosity towards these kids? I think a lot of times, just like before when you were talking about how we all want to blend in, like, you know, we go through these stages in life, and I remember as a teenager, I just wanted to be part of the whole. I never wanted to be the one. I think with Asian American and Chinese American kids, we grow up in this two very conflicted worlds. And even now even within San Francisco, where the majority of our students are Asian American, a lot of our kids just want to be white.
Yeah, the relation into that environment, right? Like, we just want to be Americans. Like, that's what we want to be. We want to be white. We want to be that social media picture that they've seen.
Right. And until we educate our students who are cross-cultural into seeing the system and understanding the system, but also understanding who they are and embracing who they are, it's hard for them to care for another. And when that other represents a part of themselves that they actually want to escape, they will push. So for me, I didn't start to understand or accept myself until I was in my third year of college. It took me that long, and it was because I took my first Asian American Studies class, and my world just blew up. It was like, I am not alone. And this is how so many people have felt throughout their lives. And it's common. And there's a part of me that makes sense, that is worth loving and understanding. And it really wasn't until my third year college where I started to become a whole person. And one thing that San Francisco did a few years ago was decide that ethnic studies should be taught in every school at the high school level. And I wish we could actually even, start building that into the middle school and elementary school levels, because had I been exposed to that kind of curriculum and teaching early in life, I can only imagine how different I would be.
Yeah. So many things. And I know that you and I can talk for hours at length on all of this stuff. And I can promise you, we are going to keep having these conversations. But one thing that I do, just in interest of time and knowing that we've got a little bit to go through on this, I do want to ask for you to give us a little bit of insight in this, because one of the things that you're really hitting on right now is definitely something that people are struggling with. They're kind of wrestling with right now, which is having this culturally responsive and culturally representative curriculum out there. And how do we do a better job of representing multiple cultures and diverse views out there. I know as I was a part of a study. A lot of us came together, all different industries, all different ethnicities and races and genders. And one of the questions that was asked was, when were you first aware of your color? And so that kind of got me thinking through a lot of pieces. And then also, when were you aware of your gender, right? And I certainly talk a lot about that in leadership and things around there. But you know, as a woman, we don't have a lot of representatives in our curriculum of women in leadership, and that's even more marked around our people of color. People of color are very, very limited in how they are represented in leadership. And most of the time it's around very specific months, right? Like February, we're gonna talk about Black History Month, and that's it. We're gonna, you know, hit the highlights and then never again. So we know and we recognize that we want to do a better job of that. Can you share something with us? And I know you can't fix this all in one moment, but can you share a thought or a strategy around how to improve cultural representation in the curriculum, even if it's a baby step at a time, but, you know, to help us better allow for connections to our content area, and help our kiddos feel proud of who they are, and know that they have a way to see themselves in the future, you know, through their learning. So got anything for us there?
You know, what you talked about in terms of baby steps is very important when it comes to deep shifts in who we are, whether it's in education or us individually or in our students. Like an example is like, you know, we have these big directives oftentimes in school districts, and people comply, but it only goes so deep, and they'll go through the motions of it, but it doesn't go deep. When we're talking about racial equity and social justice, and we want this to be deep, we want it to be life-changing. I think if we just force it as a compliance item, which we can easily do, and go through these steps, it's gonna just touch the surface. But if we can tap into, like we started earlier when we talked about the power of people's stories, you framed it really well, that equity doesn't happen until there is empathy, and empathy won't happen till we have our stories. I think, am I right? And I love that, you know, that was you. And I think that if we can start with people's stories, like you mentioned the school with 2 Mandarin speaking kids, and if there's a way for them to hear their stories and share their stories, like value the people and who they are and what they bring, and if we can do it honestly and openly, even within our faculties, right? I've gone through so many meetings in my 30 years where it's business, 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 surface, 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 blah, blah, blah. But when we can go deep, when we have that time and give people that space, and if there's that culture of trust and acceptance where people can be who they are and share their story and share their strengths and their weaknesses, where it's very, very open, that's where it starts, I think. I think when we start to see, like, part of it is that we can't see, we're the fish in the water, we can't see the water because of where we're coming from. But when we start sharing our stories together, we start to see the overlaps and the distances. And those are the places where the tension happens. And that tension is the opportunity for growth. And I think it can happen for us as faculty teams, and it can happen within our circles of students.
I love that. I love that. I think that, you know, part of it too is turning some of that over and not being the ultimate, like you said, the handing down the directive, right? Like we oftentimes see that, you know, in administration. We also see that as the teacher, right? Like, you know, here's the information that you will have, even if it's, you know, if you have in that situation where there's this two little Mandarin kids that are coming in, even if you as a teacher don't have information around that culture, you know, maybe share a story of your culture and then invite them to share a story of their own, you know. And I think that that's not putting the responsibility on that person. Instead, it's inviting them in to share and honoring their opportunity and their contribution. And then we learn from it, right? Because I think that as adults, sometimes we feel if we don't have the answer, then we don't know how to do it. That doesn't mean that we hide our head and we say we don't have a conversation. It means we need to be vulnerable and say, you know what, we're not doing a good job of this. How do I get that information? And I love that. You know, one of the beautiful things that I have seen happen in 2020, like let's celebrate a couple of the good things that have come from 2020, has been people, especially educators, coming together and acknowledging that we do need to do a better job of continually intertwining culture and race and representation of all, you know, orientations, everything into our conversations. And that starts with stories and picture books and, you know, representations in our curriculum, and not limiting that to those very specific, you know, situations. And I've seen so many social media conversations and, you know, been a part of so many, you know, webinars and things like that, where people are sharing, hey, this is a great one. Here's something that I needed over here. And really bringing those things to light, instead of sticking our heads in the sand and saying, oh, no, this is the only way that it can be taught. You know, looking at it from, great, I've always used this. There was an amazing social media post that was like, I've always taught To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite novels. I loved teaching it. That said, they were like, I've always taught this. What is a similar type novel that is written from a Black American's perspective, or from, you know, and so then that way we're expanding that perspective. And you know, I think that has been a huge eye-opener for me, and I love that's, you know, that's what I'm taking a lot of from your baby steps in there, is start with something, even if it's a picture book, even if it's you know, a phone call to home, or whatever that looks like, in order to help them feel that they are at home when they're in your classroom. So,
yeah, and for us, when we pick and choose those stories, it's so important for us. Like, there's one of the awakenings for me is how interesting white culture has influenced the stories. So To Kill a Mockingbird, still, like, the problematic part of it is that it has this white savior kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And you know, the other day my daughter was sharing a podcast with me, and the person was saying how, isn't it amazing that this guy Tarzan, he could speak to the animals, and he was so powerful, he could fight all these native Africans. And there's this white guy in Africa who just came here, and he was able to do all these things. But these Africans who were born and raised in generations were seen as weak. And that's where, like, a movie like Black Panther was wow, right? All of a sudden, here are these Africans whose science is so advanced and they're so powerful, and they bring so much richness into the world from who they are and from generations, like, yeah, that perspective, it's something that we have to be so aware of when we're choosing the stories for our kids.
Especially because it can reinforce beliefs that aren't there. I mean, I know for me, I always chose a Shakespeare to teach every year. And one year I taught the Tempest, and it was so funny because it was after, it was the end, it was our final that we were working in the year. And so my kids had, we'd really worked through a lot of analysis and a lot of conversations around, we did a lot of studies on civil rights and kind of intertwined that throughout. So when we got to the Tempest, we talked a lot about what you were sharing about how, all of a sudden here comes this white guy who, comes in, European guy who comes into an island, declares it as his own and takes on all of these pieces. And it was so funny because we were breaking it apart. One of my kids was like, I'm so glad this did not happen here. Like this is, and I was like, okay, time out. Because we talked through how the Tempest was the final Shakespeare play, and it was very much influenced by his take on colonialism and all these different elements. And I just had to, we had to completely time out, bring in US history, talk through colonialism, talk through slavery, talk through, I was like Native American, slavery, like all of this different piece. But I share that because so much of our conversations can reinforce a belief that's held if we're not careful and looking at it through that different perspective. So I'm gonna share that as our final nugget to take with us from this conversation. Definitely won't be our final conversation by any stretch of the imagination, but for today's conversation, look at that different perspective. Understand that everybody has something to offer wherever they are in their life and whoever they are. They've got a story to share. They've got an opportunity for us to look at something differently and help them be involved in this world. We love to be with our students. We have so much to offer them, and they have so much to offer us. And so thank you for offering a little bit of your heart to us and sharing your stories with us. I know I enjoyed every second of it. I hope you guys have taken something from the playbook of Victor, and I know I have. I'm writing furiously all kinds of notes down here, and I'm making sure that I bring them into my practice every day. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to all of you out there who are coaching through uncertainty and just find the certainty that is in the hearts and souls of our students. And thank you, Victor, for that very, very poignant reminder. So we'll see you guys soon, and thank you very much, Victor. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brianna.
Coaching Through Uncertainty is a Future Ready Schools podcast series that explores the new shifts in teaching and learning that are happening right now. Future Ready instructional leaders, coaches, and teachers are navigating challenges that were theoretical, optional, or barely feasible only last year, but have now become full-blown, full-speed, in-the-moment realities. Coaching Through Uncertainty is hosted by me, Brianna Hodges, National Faculty for Future Ready Schools. In each episode, we'll connect with Future Ready coaches on a mission to inspire, engage, and amplify innovative professional practice. We'll hear from the nation's top instructional leaders as they share their experience, expertise, and advice to reimagine teaching and learning to better suit today's learners with tomorrow's tools. You can subscribe and listen to Coaching Through Uncertainty wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Coaching Through Uncertainty and Future Ready Schools are projects of the Alliance for Excellent Education. Together we're better. Together we're future ready.